Have you ever thought about, living a lie? Like a really deep one.
Yeah.
One that kind of shapes your whole view of, like, everything. Well, that's what we're diving into today with Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Oh, Dostoevsky. He's really something else.
He's a Russian literary giant, and he wasn't afraid to, like, grapple with the darkest parts of being human.
Yeah, and Dostoevsky was writing during a time of huge change in Russia in the 1800s. It was like society was trying to figure itself out with all these old traditions clashing with these really radical new ideas.
You're right. It was like a total clash of, like, what people believed and, like, this new modern way of thinking.
Exactly. And all of this tension, it really fueled how Dostoevsky explored faith, reason, and just what it meant to be human.
And, his novels are full of characters wrestling with these huge moral choices.
Right.
Questions of guilt, responsibility, freedom. It's heavy stuff.
It really is.
And to help us unpack all of this, we've gathered your sources, like critical essays, biographical stuff, and, of course, Dostoevsky's own words.
Lots to dig into.
We're going to use all of this to uncover this concept he called the biggest lie we tell ourselves. What do you think that even means, the biggest lie?
Well, I think for Dostoevsky, it's the idea that we're morally independent, that we can do whatever and there are no consequences, that we don't owe anything to other people.
Like we're totally on our own. That's a pretty big lie, if you ask me.
It is. And to really get this, let's look at Raskolnikov. He's one of Dostoevsky's most intense characters from Crime and Punishment.
Raskolnikov. Okay, so refresh my memory.
So Raskolnikov, he's convinced that he's exceptional, like he's above all the rules that apply to everyone else. And this belief, it leads him to do something really awful. Murder.
Yeah, that's pretty awful. But why? Why would he even do that?
He actually thinks he's justified, like sees himself as a Napoleon figure. Above the laws that govern ordinary men.
Above the law. That's a slippery slope.
It is. And that's where Dostoevsky is so brilliant. Instead of just making Raskolnikov look cool for breaking the rules, Dostoevsky shows how much he suffers. Guilt, paranoia, it all just eats him up.
Yeah, it's like his conscience catches up to him.
Exactly. And that's the point Dostoevsky is making. We can try to fool ourselves, say we're independent, but our actions always have consequences.
We're all connected, right? Like what we do affects other people.
Right. We're not isolated islands. We're part of a larger web of relationships.
That idea of connection and responsibility, I feel like that's a thread that runs through a lot of Dostoevsky's work.
Oh, absolutely. Like in The Brothers Karamazov, there's Ivan. He's another one of those characters you don't forget. He says this really famous line, "If God doesn't exist, then everything is permitted."
Whoa. So he's saying, like, no rules, no consequences.
Basically. But Dostoevsky doesn't let him get away with it. Ivan, he ends up really suffering, going kind of crazy. And it shows how empty and destructive that philosophy really is.
It's so interesting, right? It's like these characters are wrestling with ideas, but these are ideas we all deal with in our own lives. Are we really responsible for our choices? How do our actions affect the people around us?
It's really powerful stuff. Dostoevsky makes us face these tough questions about ourselves.
And it's not just Raskolnikov and Ivan. I mean, so many of Dostoevsky's characters try to be totally independent, but they end up lonely, miserable. It makes you wonder, can we ever escape the impact of our choices, the responsibility we have to each other?
I mean, it's a huge question. It takes us right to the heart of what Dostoevsky is trying to say. But before we get into that, I want to know, how does this idea of moral autonomy, acting like we're on our own, how does that hit you personally?
It's like we've been exploring this really dark side of human nature, this biggest lie about thinking we're all alone and that there are no consequences for our actions. But you're saying Dostoevsky doesn't just leave us in that dark place.
Not at all. He gives us an antidote, a way out of that lie, a path towards real connection.
And what's that?
Humility.
Humility. Oh, that doesn't sound very exciting. I mean, we live in a world that's all about promoting yourself, individual success.
Yeah, I get it. But Dostoevsky didn't see humility as weakness or putting yourself down. For him, it was about understanding that we're all connected, we need each other, and we're responsible for each other.
So it's more like recognizing our limits.
Yeah, and embracing our vulnerability. It's pretty radical, actually, when you think about all the messages we get about being independent and self-reliant.
Yeah.
Let's take Alyosha Karamazov, for example. He really embodies Dostoevsky's idea of humility.
Alyosha, okay. How's he different from, like, Raskolnikov or Ivan?
Well, he's not trying to force his will on the world, you know? Alyosha finds meaning in compassion, caring for others, helping people.
That's interesting. So he's not trying to be above everyone else.
Exactly. Alyosha gets it. Real strength comes from admitting we're all connected, not pretending we're on our own. He understands that what we do, even small things, they affect other people.
Right. And it's like he's the one who finds peace, right? While guys like Ivan, who think they're free to do whatever they want, they end up totally messed up.
That contrast is so important. Dostoevsky's saying that pride, thinking we're better than everyone else, that's what leads to self-deception. It makes us blind to the consequences of our actions.
It feeds the lie.
Exactly. So if pride is the fuel for this biggest lie, then humility is the way to put out the fire. But the question is, how do we even become more humble in a world that rewards, like, the opposite?
Good question. It feels like swimming upstream sometimes.
Right. Dostoevsky uses this image, a metaphor, to explain it. He talks about humanity as a chain.
A chain. Kind of heavy.
Yeah, it is. But it gets across this idea of deep connection that Dostoevsky believed in. In The Brothers Karamazov, there's this elder, Zosima. He says, everyone is responsible to all men, for all men, and everything.
Whoa. So we're all responsible for each other.
For everything.
That's the idea. We're all links in this chain.
Yeah.
And what we do matters. It affects the whole chain. It's like, the butterfly effect. Oh, yeah, like that butterfly flapping its wings and causing a hurricane somewhere else.
Exactly. Dostoevsky believed that if we really got this idea of being connected, the world would be a more compassionate and just place. Think about it. If we understood how much we're responsible for each other, how would we act differently? How would our relationships change?
Those are big questions.
Yep.
And tough ones to answer. But it seems like Dostoevsky thought that facing those questions, really thinking about them, was crucial to living a good life.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting, Dostoevsky knew suffering. I mean, he lived through poverty, prison, the deaths of his wife and child. These experiences, they definitely shaped his understanding of what it means to be human and how powerful humility and compassion can be.
So it's like he went through the fire himself.
Yeah, and he came out believing that we don't have to be trapped in this lie of separation, this moral autonomy.
It's like a choice then.
It is. Are we going to be like Raskolnikov, clinging to this idea of being alone? Or are we going to be like Alyosha and embrace responsibility, knowing we're all connected? That's the question we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah, that's a powerful question. Isolation or connection? Which one are we choosing?
Yeah.
It's striking me how Dostoevsky isn't just telling stories. It's like he's giving us a whole different way to think about, like, how to live.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. His books, they're like thought experiments. They make us question our own beliefs, our actions.
So looking back at everything we've covered, all those sources you brought in, the analyses, the biographical stuff, the novels themselves, what would you say is, like, Dostoevsky's most important message for us, like, today?
I think it's his relentless pursuit of truth. Even when it's hard, uncomfortable, he makes us face the lies we tell ourselves, the ways we try to avoid responsibility. But he doesn't leave us there. He also offers hope, shows us that even when things are really rough, there's still a chance for redemption, for connection, for love.
I like that you said redemption. Because Dostoevsky himself, he went through so much. Exile, gambling, losing his child, all that had to shape his writing.
Oh, absolutely. Dostoevsky believed that suffering, it could actually help us grow, help us understand ourselves and the world better. He saw humility not as a weakness, but as a strength, like being willing to admit our faults.
It's like what you were saying before about humility being the answer to that biggest lie, that moral autonomy thing. Like true freedom isn't about being independent. It's about recognizing that we're all connected.
Exactly. And this idea that we're interconnected, it doesn't just affect our personal lives, It changes how we look at society, things like social justice, poverty, climate change.
Wow. It's almost too much to think about. All those consequences, the responsibility we have to each other. I don't know. It's easy to feel helpless when you look at all the problems in the world.
I know what you mean. But Dostoevsky, he reminds us that even small acts of kindness, of connection, they can make a difference. Remember Alyosha? He wasn't trying to save the world, but just by being kind and understanding, he had a huge impact on the people around him.
That's a good point. It's like choosing humility, seeing how we're all connected. It's not about being perfect or fixing everything. It's about showing up, being real, understanding that we affect other people. And, trying to make the world a little bit better one step at a time.
That's it. And that's why Dostoevsky's work is still relevant today. He's not giving us easy answers or pretending everything's going to be perfect. It's about grappling with the hard questions, seeing how complicated life is, and encouraging us to live in a way that's more meaningful, more connected.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dostoevsky,
Hmm.
I want to leave you with a question, one he might have asked himself. What's the biggest lie you're telling yourself? What would it take to live a life that's more honest, more connected?
That's a great question to think about. And I hope our conversation has given you some things to chew on, some new ways of looking at things as you keep exploring Dostoevsky's amazing work.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's been a real exploration of what it means to be human, with all the messiness and contradictions. We hope you'll keep reading Dostoevsky and keep wrestling with those big questions and discover the truths that resonate with you.